SEC Media Days, obviously in the books. We were over there all 4 days. Now, I know you could watch the press conferences, and I know you've seen your beat writers and whatnot and what they said. I'm just going to give you some things I took away and also some things I picked up on, okay? So Billy Napier was really interesting to me. I set out this week, and he was a name I circled. Now, we got a lot of big names on the show, and all of those individual interviews are on the YouTube channel, and I don't think we had a bad one this week. I loved them all. I wanted to talk to Billy Napier, and he was awesome off camera. He was awesome on camera. He is so bunkered, man. There is so much negative energy in the public about Florida football, and I genuinely think he is so bunkered. He is so foxholed, he doesn't even have awareness of it. And I thought it was so fun to talk to him about the day-to-day inner grind of recruiting in the SEC, in the state of Florida, how the portal works, how he was candid about how they had to learn, and they had to get some egg on their face early on. And then they also had staff turnover really late in the cycle. He is a good coach, man. And I talked to other coaches about him. No one really downgrades his ability as a coach. The only doubt when football people have talked to me about Billy Napier is he going to be given enough time if 2023 doesn't work out to 7 wins or more? And there's a great big question mark. I don't know the answer to that. I think Napier is a good dude, and I think if you could sit down with him, and especially off camera, I think you'd look at him a little differently. That's what I think. I think you'd look at him a little differently. I think some guys, especially if they're not like 15 or 20-year veterans, when the camera's on, you can have a little monotone nature about yourself. You can sound a little cerebral, and that gets misconstrued as unemotional. That guy has a ton of emotion, ton of energy, ton of fire. And I don't know if you've ever met people like this, but when you just talk to him, like if you were sitting down to lunch with him and you brought up certain subjects, you'd see those eyes get wide. You see that fire. I've seen it. You'd see it. And I hope he's given enough length of rope that we get to see it at Florida. Jimbo and A&M, I have no clue about. I did not get to talk to Jimbo because I had obligations with CBS. And you know what happened the last time he and I spoke. So I was looking forward to that. We didn't get to get him. Sometimes there are storylines that are really overhyped. Happens all the time. And most of the time they underdeliver because people have been focusing on stuff that does not matter. In the case of Texas A&M's offense, that's all that matters. And a lot of people are focused on it. Now, you may be focused on the right thing for the wrong reasons. I was talking to Billy Lucci and David Nuno and the guys over at Texags, and I was asked this very question. What are the keys here? Well, it's obviously how Petrino is plugged in, how the offense functions and operates. But the thing I care about is I don't really care if they get along. I could not care less if Bobby Petrino loves Jimbo Fisher or whether if he was on fire. You know the saying. I care about whether they can put a functioning offense and a winning product on the field. Emotions totally removed from it. And if they can, all that else is irrelevant. If they can't, then we've already had that conversation on the show. I think a lot of you listened, if you did, to Fisher earlier this week, and there is no yes when people ask him about the offense and how it's going to function. Is Bobby Petrino going to be the guy all this is delegated to? You're not going to get a yes because that's not the way he feels about it. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. I don't have the best of feelings about it, if you want me to be real with you. Now, I also don't do predictions in July, so it's not a prediction special yet. It is one of the most important stories to watch in college football this year. The Texas A&M offense, early in the year, they go to Miami week 2, so we won't have to wait long. I was around Alabama a lot this week. I was around Bama a lot. I was around Nick Saban, obviously, a lot this week. The mentality has totally shifted there. I don't just mean, they're fired up, they feel disrespected. That kind of stuff is really oversold in a lot of cases. I think they understand what they got to get back to. There's a scene in Gone in 60 Seconds, which is a beautifully underrated movie, by the way. And Nick Cage comes back in town, spoiler alert if you hadn't seen it, and his little brother's in trouble. And he used to be the best car thief in Southern California, but he got out of the biz just in time. And now Raymond Calitri, he's got his little kid brother held hostage. And the ransom is, I need 50 cars. 50 cars or your brother dies. And Nick Cage is the one to do it. But before he goes and steals all those cars, what does he do? He calls his mom. Actually, he doesn't call her. He just surprises her at the cafe she's working at. And he takes her and he sits her down and she says, "Can you get him out of this?" And he says, "I can, but it means doing things. Things I told you I'd never do again." I think Nick Saban and Alabama are fully capable of winning the national championship this year, but it's going to mean doing things that you thought they'd never do again. It's going to mean what they less affectionately refer to as murder ball. And if you've ever watched murder ball, you know it doesn't leave a lot to the imagination, and it also doesn't leave a lot of margins. They're bigger and faster and stronger and deeper than you, and they are all holding a sledgehammer, and they just hit you with it for 4 quarters. You can't stand up to it. That used to be the long and short of an Alabama game. The scores used to all look the same. It was going to be them scoring somewhere between 35 and 45, and you scoring somewhere between 7 and 14. And that was what the final score was going to be about 8 times out of 10. And then quarterbacks like Tua Tagovailoa came along, and Mac Jones was there, and Bryce Young has been there. And Saban sat right there 3 feet from me and said, "We got too Bryce-centric last year." That is code for we were about to run the blank, 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 blank out of the football this year. And we got Roydell Williams and Jace McClellan. We got Justice Haynes back here. Richard Young is a true freshman. Jam Miller. They are like 5 or 6 deep with quality options in the running back room. He did talk about how he feels a lot better about their blocking at the tight end position. Their offensive line, with Eric Wolford as that offensive line coach, not to be undersold there, could be one of the best in the country. That is a Joe Moore Award caliber offensive line. Ultra physical. The most violent bowling ball you've ever seen. That's what that offense has the potential to be. You want a bold prediction from me? I think they'll lead the league in rushing this year. I think that is how drastic the offensive shift in the Alabama offensive philosophy will be. If that's the case, they're equipped to win a national championship. If it's not, I don't think they have the quarterback play to do it. Tennessee, it's a team versus program thing. That's the theme I've gotten every time I've talked to people in the program. Kind of pun intended. They won a lot of games last year. Teams have done that before. A program sustains it year over year. We don't know if Tennessee has a good program or not. They don't. They were worried about the NCAA, and finally they got that out of the way. I mean, I was sitting in the room with Heupel today when he was talking to Dennis, and it's like, it's like when you can finally talk about it in past tense, what the NCAA sanctions were instead of what they could be. That's a relief. And the fact that now you just get to move forward and your fate is totally in your hands, it's about Joe Milton at quarterback there. I know it sounds so simplistic. Oh, you just mention every quarterback. I sure do. In these kinds of offenses, I sure do. What would Tennessee be without Hendon Hooker last year? What would Hendon Hooker have been without Tennessee last year? It's another good way to put it. What has Joe Milton been? What will he be with Josh Heupel inserting him as his full-time starter this year? I look at the schedule. Colin's got it up on the screen right now. You think about Georgia, Florida, and that's been the mainstay as the big rivalry in the East. But this year, the premier game in the East figures to be Georgia, Tennessee. And where is it? If you're not watching, if you're listening on podcast, do you realize this game is November 18th? You got to wait until the second to last week of the season. So what you think and what I think about that matchup right now, what the hypothetical odds on the game are right now, they mean nothing. So many things could happen in terms of injuries. What if we figure out Georgia's pass rush is only fairly good by Georgia standards? And what if we figure out Joe Milton is the real deal? What if we get in a situation, in other words, where they're playing them in Neyland, which is on absolute fire, the likes of which it hasn't been since the Alabama game last year, and it's that kind of environment, and maybe Carson Beck is pretty good, not great or elite by any means, and Georgia can't get to the passer, and Tennessee scoring more points than you're comfortable with, and you can't trade every possession with them like maybe you thought you could with Stetson Bennett. This kind of stuff happens every year. There are elite teams every year that you think look invincible in the preseason, and then football, or in our world, life, happens. Let's just keep an eye on it. Let's not pencil in 12-0 quite yet. LSU, Brian Kelly was the first guy I talked to this week. This time last year, yeah, people were talking about whether he was a good fit or not, but we've beaten that to death. I thought it was about entry point with Brian Kelly last year. I always thought he was going to succeed. He is going to succeed there, but I had no clue what to expect in year one. So I didn't even expect him to win the West, certainly not. But I thought it was about entry point. So my philosophy was always, he's going to win. Let's find out how far he's going to have to climb. They're going to hop in this SEC West picture with Brian Kelly, and they're going to peg themselves. They're going to slot themselves somewhere. Where is it going to be? Turns out it was winning the West. That doesn't make them a better program than Alabama, certainly, but it also did not make them the dregs of the division. Far from it. And so they already pegged themselves probably in a little bit higher entry point than most, including even me, expected. Now it's the same thing. Program versus team. Same theme as we had in Tennessee, like 2 minutes ago. How good is this program going to be? I got no doubt about it. None whatsoever. I've got far less doubt here than I do at Tennessee, only because I've seen Brian Kelly do it. And in fairness to Heupel, I haven't seen him do it. Jaden Daniels was rated as the top quarterback, I believe, in the SEC. I think he'll end up being the first-team All-SEC quarterback. Man, if they get that kind of play out of him, man, if they get depth behind Malik Neighbors, if like Brian Thomas Jr., if those receivers behind that wide receiver one start to slot themselves, if they get just above average production at tailback, and probably most importantly, if those portals hit in the secondary, they could win the West. Producer Jesse already has a feel on this. I'm not quite there yet. So fun times to be had by all in the SEC.